Mohandas, Karamchand, Gandhi, and the Bloodless Path to Peace.
On August 15, 1947, India celebrated their first ever Independence Day after being under British control for nearly 200 years. But missing was the key figure of India's independence, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, a man who promoted peace and compromise instead of violence, for by his words, nothing enduring can be built on violence.
The country of India had been under British control for centuries. The British paramountcy was introduced in about 1820. This rule was controlled by the East India Company, but was soon challenged by the India Mutiny of 1857. Preceding this mutiny, the British used several tactics to seize control.
Methods enacted by the British, such as the doctrine of lapse, first perpetrated by Lord Dalhousie, annexed the land of many wealthy Indians, which angered the Hindu societies further.
Additionally, Westernization and Christian missionaries provoked the Hindu religious beliefs.
The mutiny broke out in the only military that the Indians were organized in, the Bengal Army. The root of the revolt was the establishment of the new Enfield rifle. In order to load the gun, the Indian soldiers had to bite off the ends of the greased cartridges. A rumor was spread that the grease used contained pigs and cow's lard, and it was an insult to both Muslims and Hindus to have oral contact with such substances. There was no conclusive evidence that the grease actually contained these substances, but it added to the rising suspicion of the British's attempts to subvert the Indian society.
Attacks on the British officials and the refusal of the Enfield eventually caused these soldiers to shoot their officials and march to Delhi to form a tumultuous soldiery. The revolt angered the British and ended with the death of hundreds of India people in a frenzy of bayonets and cannons. This event was named the Indian Mutiny of 1857, and following the traumatic event, the British abolished the East India Company for a more direct rule known as the Raj, and the government that controlled the Indians was reorganized. After the reinstitution of British control, the Raj enforced new laws and acts that the Indian people further revolted against, leaving them in poverty.
These episodes led to a poor and suffering India. The penniless Indian people were starving and couldn't afford food. Wealthy Indians often lost their land to the British, losing their inheritance and the respected socio-economic status. This status was recognized by many, but a man by the name of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi introduced a new idea that would be the key of the revolution that would end their suffering.
Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869, into a family of 7. At the age of 19, Gandhi left to London, England to study law at the Inner Temple. In mid-1891, Gandhi came to India and unsuccessfully set up a law practice in Bombay. Later, he accepted a position in a law firm that sent him to an office in South Africa. Upon his arrival as an Indian immigrant, Gandhi was an outsider. He faced the struggles of racism. On a train voyage to Pretoria, South Africa, Gandhi was pulled off a train and beaten by a white stagecoach driver after refusing to give up his first-class seat to a European commuter. This experience changed Gandhi's mind and nature and gave him new concepts and ideas.
It demonstrated to him that reacting violently towards problems was not ideal and that there were alternative ways to resolve conflict without bloodshed. It forged the path for Gandhi to construct and develop the idea of a satyagraha, a passive resistance to accomplish a peaceful resolution.
Gandhi returned to India in 1915 and decided with his wife Kasturba to travel across the country in a third-class train. Upon his arrival in India, Gandhi launched his Satyagraha movement. Gandhi called the first protest of his movement against the Rowlatt Act, an act that allowed the British to imprison Indians without trial. But their protests turned violent. With the massacre of Amritsar, the British turned to kill 400 people and injure 1,300 people. This event turned Gandhi to start campaigning with even more of a diplomatic approach.
By the autumn of 1920, Gandhi was a significant political figure. He renovated the Indian National Congress into a political tool for Indian nationalism. His message was that the imperfections of the Indians themselves kept them in bondage rather than the British guns. His non-violent, anti-cooperation program against the British included boycotts that were not limited to goods, but also extended to other establishments. This movement led to arrests of thousands of satyagrahis who denied laws and gladly lined up to go to prison. The course seemed bright, but contrary to Gandhi's view, violence was still a prominent force.
Gandhi himself was later arrested on March 10, 1922, and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. After bearing appendicitis, he was released in February 1924, 4 years early. By the time he returned, however, the political status had completely changed. The congressional parties had split under Chittaranjan Das and Motilal Nehru, the father of India's first prime minister. Moreover, his movement had completely dissolved. Unsuccessfully, Gandhi attempted to bring peace to the battling communities.
Eventually, after a serious outbreak of unrest, Gandhi conducted a 3-week fast in the autumn of 1924 to bring the people of Delhi back to the path of bloodlessness. It touched the hearts of the Indian people and the people closely connected to Gandhi's movement. The fast brought masses of people to his path, which accelerated his movement into full force. In the winter of 1928, Gandhi went on to demand dominion status, which would put India into a more equal status. He threatened for nationwide nonviolence if the British did not comply. However, the British continued to ignore their demands.
In reply to the British refusal for dominion status, Gandhi kept his promise to launch nationwide nonviolence. He put the Salt March into motion, a satyagraha against the British tax on salt, affecting the poorest of the community. This march ended up being one of the most spectacular and successful campaigns in Gandhi's nonviolent war against the British. More than 60,000 people were imprisoned, and after negotiation with Lord Irwin, Gandhi accepted a truce and continued to attend the Round Table Conference in London as a representative of the Indian National Congress.
At the conference, however, the British focused on minorities rather than the larger transfer of power, to Gandhi's disappointment. The British continued to take offense and imprison Gandhi once again while attempting to isolate his influence. Their efforts, however, were not successful. Gandhi embarked on a fast while still in prison, and the emotional upheaval of the country eventually resulted in his release and the intentional rejection of the British decision to segregate the lowest class of the Indian caste system.
Following these efforts, in 1934, Gandhi resigned from political power as people used his nonviolence as a political tool instead of a fundamental principle to live by. He went to work with weaving, hand-spinning, and other work for the unemployed peasantry.
Finally, with the outbreak of World War II, Gandhi again became politically active. The Indian National Congress was not devoted to pacifism and prepared to support the British in war if Indian self-government was assured. The failure of a British offer that Gandhi found unsatisfactory led Gandhi to eventually demand immediate British withdrawal from India in 1942. This became known as the Quit India movement. In a war against the Axis powers, Britain sharply imprisoned all of the Congress leadership with a plan to terminate their efforts to focus on the prominent World War. Gandhi and his wife, along with other important party members, were imprisoned in the Aga Khan Palace. Gandhi's wife Kasturba died in 1944, briefly before Gandhi and the others were released.
After a vigorous fight against the British, new hopes rose with the triangular negotiations with the Indian National Congress, the Muslim League under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the British government. Their work finally concluded with the Mountbatten Plan of June 3, 1947, and the formation of two new nations, India and Pakistan. Achieved with a bloodless intent, this was the greatest compromise in Indian history.
Gandhi showed the prime example of how the modern world should deal with conflict, and he showed and achieved an example that many others would follow for centuries to come. Men like Nelson Mandela and the Black Lives Matter movement would continue his legacy, and even whole countries like Estonia and their singing revolution would follow his footsteps. Even on the other side of the world and decades later, Martin Luther King Jr. would continue to follow Gandhi's example with his nonviolent campaign, with satyagraha-like movements such as the Montgomery bus boycott, establishing the biggest equality movement in all of U.S. history.
Gandhi's life stands as the only real proven solution to resolving conflict today. He showed an example of using peace to achieve peace and use compromise instead of weapons. His accomplishments are building blocks to the path of world peace. Today's world can still greatly benefit from Gandhi's peaceful, pure principles and intent.